Okay, so I made a recording here in case the demo gods aren't with us. So here we go. So the first thing we're going to do is install the serverless framework. So we're going to say npm install serverless dash global. Again, I think as I mentioned this earlier, you need Node and npm to install the serverless CLI. And so if you already have serverless installed, this will do an update on it. Here we go. So the first thing I'm going to do is just verify serverless is installed and working correctly by typing in serverless dash dash help, and it gives me a little bit of information about some of the commands I can issue with the serverless CLI. So let's do this. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to create a serverless application. So let's see what options we have with create. So I'm going to say serverless create dash dash help. And this should give me a list of templates that come out of the box. Now there's additional templates that you can specify via this template URL path. So there's lots of extensions available on GitHub to do that. But out of the box, serverless comes with pre-built templates for deploying functions on AWS that are Node.js or TypeScript or ECMAScript or Python or Java with Maven, Groovy with Gradle, Java with Gradle, Kotlin, and you see the long list, right? So I'm not going to go through all of them. So let's create our first serverless application. So I'm going to say serverless create a template of AWS Node.js. Now, one more thing that I'm not covering in this demo here is um, the credentials piece of this, right? So there, I have previously configured my credentials for AWS, and so I typed in serverless config credentials -p for AWS, then my key and my secret um, that I had from AWS to configure access to AWS. I obviously didn't want to do that live on the video, so um, and then have to go revoke my keys and secret. So um, that's some of the stuff that happened behind the scenes, but that's how I configured my AWS access. And if you're familiar with AWS, this is and have used the AWS CLI, this is the same thing as doing AWS config from the CLI, where it creates a config and a credential files in a .aws directory in your home, right? So this is doing the same thing and leveraging the same mechanism. So first thing, let's go ahead and create our serverless function. So I'm going to say serverless create AWS Node.js. Let's give it a name of, I don't know, Veni Service 1 and a path of Veni Service 1. And serverless is going to do its work and create essentially a boilerplate of a project for us that is set up to deploy to AWS built in Node. So let's go into the directory and let's just take a look. So looks like it's created 3 files. The first is just a .getignore file, and then a handler.js and a serverless YAML file. So let's just take a quick look at those files and see what they look like. So we'll open the, actually, let's start with the serverless YAML file first. So this is the configuration file for your serverless function, service, whatever you want to call it. There's lots of things that are sort of commented in here that give you clues as to what some of the other possibilities and capabilities are. So first things first, here's a service. It's called Veni Service 1. My provider is AWS. My runtime is Node 6. I'm going to say let's try 8. There's lots of other things that are in here commented that we're not going to look at the moment. And the next thing that's not commented out is a function. In the function stanza. And then in here, I'm defining a function called hello, whose handler is handler.hello. So if we go back to our handler.js, you see that function right there. So here's hello, and just reading it looks like it returns a JSON string that says go serverless with a status code of 200. So let's actually deploy and execute that. So to deploy this server, the serverless application, all I'm going to do is type in serverless deploy. Now what's happening here is the serverless framework is packaging your application. Again, one file, but it's packaging your application as a zip file. It's using your configuration that's in the YAML file to create a CloudFormation template. So if you're not familiar with CloudFormation is AWS's version of infrastructure as code. So if you're familiar um, with ARM on the Azure platform, it's the same thing, right? It's a um, declarative way, or Terraform is another one which I actually prefer because it's multi-cloud, cloud agnostic. Um, but CloudFormation is Amazon's way to provision infrastructure as code, and you can describe CloudFormation either in JSON or YAML. So this is creating all of that for us and uploading it to AWS and deploying our function. So looks like it is finished. It's deployed our service in a stage called dev. And I think we'll talk about stage maybe later on, depending on time. But think of stage as your environment. And so whether it's dev, test, stage, or prod, um, that's that. It's deploying it to a region called US East 1, which is in Virginia. And looks like it's deployed the function called hello. So let's actually invoke it. So I'm going to say serverless invoke dash function, and the function name is hello. And it called out to AWS and executed that server. And just to make sure there's no funny business, we're going to go back here and we'll change the text to say hello that conference. Okay, let's save that. Again, not very creative, but hey, it should illustrate the point. Serverless deploy. And again, it's doing the same thing, zipping up the function, creating the CloudFormation template, uploading that to S3, invoking CloudFormation to do the work. So now if I say serverless invoke function hello, I should expect different text than I had before. And there it is. It says hello, that conference. So let's just take a quick minute to go to the AWS side to see what happened here. So I'm logged into AWS console. Here I'm logged into my personal account. And I am going to go to CloudFormation. Here's my service called Vinny Service 1 with the stage of dev. And so if you're familiar with CloudFormation, you're sort of familiar with this view and what this looks like. But these are all the events on what was executed. So you can tell right here, started at 12:10. So this is when I was recording this on Sunday. And it's telling us, right, we got a bunch of creates, we created some buckets, that's complete. It's creating an IAM role, it's creating a log group, it's creating all the functions, the versions, and it's doing all its work. Let's see actually what that CloudFormation template looks like. So I'm going to click on Other Actions and View, Edit in Designer. So CloudFormation has this visual designer. I'm not a big user of it, but it's interesting to illustrate. Let me zoom out a little bit and see if I can move this up by here and zoom in again a little. So this is sort of a visual representation of what we just did, right? So we created a function um, called hello. It's a Lambda function, so that's represented right here. Here is the bucket, the S3 blob storage that is holding our code and configuration. Here is the role, identity and access management role that allows the thing to execute, keeping track of the version, as well as the log group. So let's see what that looks like in code. Ooh, yikes, that's not readable. So we're going to do just a little toggle from YAML to JSON to make that a little more readable. Again, I'm guessing this is not super readable, but you can see this is how you define CloudFormation in JSON, and It's creating a bucket for S3. It's creating a log group. It's creating an IAM role that allows execution of Lambda. It's creating the actual function that's over here in the zip file and this S3 bucket, and all that good stuff, right? So again, just sort of interesting to see. Just by doing serverless deploy, all of this stuff is constructed for us. So, yep, nope, I don't want to save any of that. And, oh, did I not say that? Yeah, let's leave and not save. And I'm going to do one last thing. Let's go to S3 just to show you what that looks like. So let's search for that bucket, Vinny. Oops. Oh, Vinny service 1. There it is. Inside that bucket is another folder called serverless, Vinny service, my stage of dev. I deployed 2 instances of it or 2 versions of it, so they're both here. So here's the actual zip file of that code, and here's the CloudFormation template if I wanted to actually look at it. So I'm not going to look at it, so let's get back over here. So just by running the deploy command, it constructed all of that infrastructure for us. So let's do a little bit more with that serverless function. So I'm going to go back to Visual Code for a second and go back to my YAML file, and let's add some event listeners to this thing. So I think we talked a little bit about events in the notion of serverless, and so there's several events that you can configure to invoke the function. So in this case, we're creating events of type HTTP with the path of users create. I don't know. Let's change that to /API. Again, not creative, but that'll do for our demo. And the type method is get. Let's actually do a post as well. So I'm going to say path is create stuff, and the method is post. If you need, you can do things like cores, set that to true. Let's go ahead and save that. Go back over here and say serverless deploy. And again, it's going to do the same thing, uploading it, creating the CloudFormation template, executing the CloudFormation template on AWS. We added now 2 HTTP endpoints, and so we should expect something different this time. So let's see what it does. Come on, dots, move faster. And there we go. So looks like the same information that we got before: name of the service, the region it's in, and now we have these 2 new endpoints that are exposed. So let's actually see what they look like. So I'm going to open up that guy, and I think I have Postman running. Let's take a look at it in Postman. So I'm going to just say this is a GET request, send, and it returns me the message, hello.conference, and then all of the input parameters are returned to me because that's what we're doing in our JavaScript code. Interesting thing to note is I think I talked about server functions warm-up time. This one took 1200 milliseconds. Next time I do it, it should take a lot less, because now the container for that function is loaded and it's all up and running. Let's try that post here. So I'm going to go back to this guy. Let's copy that URL. Going to say, let's do a post here. And let's add some. Again, I'm just going to add some form data, submit, and again, I'm getting the same message. And if I look at the body that's returned in here, you see it's returning the information that I typed in. So we did the same thing, get post, and we're able to execute it. Now, one more thing that might be a little interesting to look at is going back to CloudFormation and seeing what does that look like now. We We looked at CloudFormation before when we didn't have an HTTP endpoint. We do now. So what does that look like visually? So we'll just do a quick check. We'll go back to the designer just to see what that looks like. All right, we want to hide this guy a little bit. We want this guy to come up. There we go. Looks like there's a lot more stuff in there. So, all right, let's see if that's good enough. All right, so, all right. I don't think we're going to be able to fit all of that on one screen, but anyway, here we go. Let's kind of take a quick tour of this. We're starting with, we got our function. We've got the IAM role for that guy. We've got the bucket. What I wanted to show you was the interesting stuff on this side is we added a new AWS service called API Gateway that now is invoking our Lambda function. So you see a connection back from this guy to then this guy. So we've got our get and our post that are now invoking our Lambda function. So again, if I were to switch to the code view just for a second, you'll see, okay, I don't know why it always does that, but here you are. I think we saw all of this stuff before. Let's see if we can find something about our API gateway in here. Here we go. So here's an API gateway, REST API. Creating the resources, and let's find. So I think we said core is equal to true on the post, so it's automatically setting up all those headers. And let's see, anything else interesting in here? Oh, here's the get method, and we didn't really set cores for it, so you don't see it there. Anyway, so just to give you a sense of what all of this stuff looks like on the back end. Let's do one more thing before we leave this example and try maybe a different example is rollback. So the notion of rollback is kind of cool. You're constantly making changes, and you deploy something that just doesn't work, or you want to roll back because you made a mistake or there's some error. The serverless framework through its CLI has a really nice way built in to rollback. So I'm just going to type in serverless rollback and hit enter. And it's going to give me a set of choices saying, hey, we got a bunch of timestamps here. Which one do you want to roll back to? So I'm going to say, this one looks good. That appears to be the previous timestamp. So I'm going to say serverless rollback -t that guy. Now what I want you to remember is we had just recently exposed these endpoints, and I think if I pick the right version, you shouldn't see those endpoints anymore because the code will be reverted back to the previous state. So it's reverting it, rolling it back, and redeploying the older version. And let's see if I pick the right timestamp. So if I type in, actually let's get up here, serverless info. And ta-da, you notice that the endpoints are gone because I roll back to a previous version. Right, so perfect. So that's a quick tour of serverless, a little node app. Let's do one example. I think we had a few Java folks here, so I'm going to say serverless create -- help, and we'll run through this very quickly. We'll just say serverless create template is AWS Java Maven or Gradle. I'm going to do Maven. I know that all the Gradle folks in the room are groaning right now. Sorry about that. Let's call this Vinny Service 2 with the name of that and a path of that. Vinny Service 2. And if I go into Vinny Service 2, and let's see what's in there. All right, so created a bunch of files in the directory. So we'll do just a very quick look at this. I'm going to start with the YAML file. Again, name of the service, provider is AWS, runtime is Java 8. Here's the package. So if you're familiar with Maven, typically it'll create a jar file that is your code, potentially with its libraries already loaded up in there. So that typically gets dropped in the target directory. Obviously, if you're compiling differently, we can change this to reflect the location as well as the name of the file you're doing. And in this case, it's creating a class, or it's using a class called handler that's in the package com.serverless to be the handler for this hello function. And while we're in here, let's just go ahead and add that event for HTTP. So we'll keep it simple. We'll just do get for now. I'm going to go ahead and save this guy. Let's go back to my POM XML. So again, if you're familiar with Maven, this is your pretty standard Maven POM file. Looks like we've got some Amazon stuff, log4j, Jackson for JSON, and then a shade plugin. All right, let's just take a quick look at the code. I'm just going to look at one class. So here's a class that we saw in our YAML file. So if I go back here, right, it's com serverless handler, which is what this guy is. So it's in a package called com serverless namespace, if you're familiar with that terminology. So this is a Java package. This is the class handler. It implements a class called, actually an interface called request handler that is part of the AWS Lambda SDK. And basically returns a string that says go serverless. So let's go ahead and deploy that. So we'll say Maven. First, actually, yeah, let's actually build it. So we'll say Maven package. So we'll let Maven do its thing based on the POM file, download and include any of the jars that are needed, create in the target directory a file called hello-dev.jar. Now we're ready to deploy this, so we'll say serverless deploy. And again, it's doing the same thing. It's uploading the jar file to S3. It's creating the CloudFormation template, and it's once the CloudFormation template is uploaded, it's actually executing that template on AWS to provision all of the infrastructure that it needs and services that it needs. So in this case, it's creating an S3 bucket, it's creating a Lambda function, it's creating an API gateway, it's creating an identity access management role, it's creating a logging group in CloudWatch, and it's doing all of that for me without me having to specifically do anything with that. So I love the simplicity and the power of the serverless framework. Um, the fact that you can do so much with so little. And the thing that I appreciate is I get to focus on the code that I'm building and less about the infrastructure that I'm trying to provision. So let's just do a quick sanity check. So we expose this here as an endpoint, the response. Let's actually go back in Postman, send it a GET request, and see what it looks like, and just make sure it works. And ta-da! So now, one of the things you'll notice is, it has to load JVM and a Tomcat, so the initial launch time is a little longer. It's almost 5 seconds here, but now subsequent requests should be milliseconds. So I think this goes back to this notion of, warming up your containers. Okay, let's do one more thing here. So, okay, I'm back at CloudFormation. You notice that there's my Vinny Service 1 and Vinny Service 2 that I just deployed. Let's say you're done with this thing and you want to clean up all of the stuff that you got, that this serverless function created for you. Well, the old way, the manual way would be to go into your AWS console, go to the CloudFormation. The nice thing with the stack that CloudFormation creates is that you can go to one place to clean up. Otherwise, you'd have to go to S3, go to IAM, go to CloudWatch to clean up all these things. Or I can just go to serverless here and say serverless remove, and the serverless framework will do the cleanup for me. So it's doing essentially the same thing that I mentioned. It is executing the CloudFormation template, and um, and that whatever the CloudFormation template created, it is undoing. So it's deleting the S3 bucket, deleting our files from it. It's deleting the IAM role, and ta-da, everything is clean. If I go back to my console and refresh, Vinny Service 1 should be gone. So it was never here. It's all cleaned up. And it's a great way to sort of clean up all these resources because, um, as you saw here in just by deploying a very simple function, we ended up touching 5 or 6 different AWS services, and there's um, things that are sort of scattered throughout the console, and so doing it through the web console is just not a scalable thing. So um, this is a really nice way to sort of clean up. So we did we created a node service, we deployed in multiple versions, we exposed HTTP endpoints, we created a Java version, we actually rolled back a version, we deleted a version. So hopefully this gives you a good sense of sort of foundational knowledge about the serverless framework and some of the capabilities. Let's do one more thing. Let's say you're building a single page application. So I want to build a single page application and have the serverless framework do all the work for me. And so part of the reason I'm doing this is I want to expose you guys to this notion of serverless plugins. So serverless has this rich library of plugin. So I'm going to say serverless create with a template of hello world, which is a nice shortcut. Now I'll show you what that looks like. So I'll call this name is spa app 1 with the path of spa app 1 and done. So if I check my directory, it should have created something called spa app 1. Let's go take a look and see what's here. Again, familiar constructs. Here's a handler.js and our serverless YAML file. So let's take a quick look at them. So that hello world template is a quick and simple way to create a node service on AWS with a HTTP endpoint already exposed, right? So I wanted to sort of simplify that, so I used hello world. We'll look at our handler. In here, we're actually setting the CORS headers and then just saying, hey, go serverless. So nothing magical. Pretty straightforward stuff, right? So let's go and, well, I keep forgetting the shortcut for that. We're going to add a plugin. So first things first is let's go back here to this directory. We'll do git init. I'm sorry, I'm always just so used to doing git init in every directory that I get into when I start. Yes, we're going to create a little package JSON by doing npm init. Then I'm going to say npm install -- save, and I'm going to install a package called, so can't type, serverless finch. So this is a plugin that will allow me to create a serverless application. So, all right, so npm is telling me it's added a bunch of packages and we are good to go. So let's go over here. I see my node modules directory is there. I see my package JSON, so things are good. Let's go ahead and create a directory called website. I'm going to go in here and just create a index.html and error.html. Make sure those got created. And we will edit error and say, oh no. And then in our index, we'll say the future is serverless. Again, cannot type. All right, so this is obviously an example. You'd have a real web app with lots and lots of stuff that you'd have in there. But I want to just demonstrate this notion of a plugin. So we're going to add to our serverless YAML file the plugin. So we're going to add this plugin called serverless Finch. And then we're going to add some custom configuration for that guy. So we'll say bucket name for this thing is, let's call this serverless spa app 1. I can't think of anything creative, so we'll call this, what's the folder that has our web content? So we'll describe the distribution folder, and I think we just called it a website. So let's see. Oops. Oh, sorry, not in VI. Let's save and make sure we're in the right directory. We're in the spa1 directory, so I'm going to say serverless client deploy. And if I typed in everything correctly and I didn't, of course I typed it. Oh, hello. There we go. Let's save that. Oh, of course. Forgot to describe the client. Save that. And it's telling me, hey, do you want to upload all the files from the website directory to that S3 bucket? And I'm going to say yes to everything. And ta-da! It created an S3 bucket, copied my website in quotes to that location. It enabled web hosting on that S3 bucket. And I should be able to hit that in the browser, and ta-da, there's the wonderful website that we just launched. So that was a quick notion on how to use plugins. Now, serverless also has this notion of components, and I don't think we have enough time to get into that, but as you start exploring the serverless framework, definitely check out serverless components, because they give you another way to package a bunch of cloud resources together to build applications.